to Beat Around the Barn. Animal welfare is Hogs and Kisses' main concern. Our mission is to give unwavering, excellent care to the agricultural animals in our family. But it does beg the question, should animals be in human care at all? Shouldn't they be allowed to live freely and live their own lives? Well, the reality is that we rescue animals from situations of neglect and suffering, so their welfare is our primary interest. Even though the topics of animal welfare is often discussed along with animal rights, they're actually very, very different. Animal rights is, and according to PETA, quote, animal rights means that animals deserve certain kinds of consideration of what is in their best interests, regardless of whether they are cute, useful to humans, or an endangered species, and regardless of whether any human cares about them at all, end quote. Or, according to Human League, animal rights are moral principles grounded in the belief that non-human animals deserve the ability to live as they wish without being subjected to the desires of human beings, end quote. So we thought we would spend this episode unpacking what animal rights is and whether animals should have rights. We've invited animal rights lawyer Sarah Thompson to discuss animal rights and aspiring animal rights lawyers for a roundtable discussion afterwards, so that you can explore whether you think animals should have rights. Now, since Hogs and Kisses is a sanctuary for farmed animals, we're going to focus there as opposed to our companion and exotic animals. So, come join us.
Hi, Sarah. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining this episode of Beat Around the Barn. I thought that maybe we'd start with you introducing yourself and the law group that you work with so that people can get acquainted with who you are.
Okay, great. So my name's Sarah Thompson, and I work with Ryther Law Group, as well as Expand Animal Rights Now. Ryther Law Group is an animal rights-focused law firm. We only handle matters that advance the interests and rights of animals. In conjunction with Ryther Law Group, we also have a nonprofit entity called Expand Animal Rights Now to help with more pro bono cases and lower income clients, as well as to expand the rights of animals in a broader sense. And that includes sometimes writing amicus briefs and other things so that we can make an impact at a broader level. For Ryther Law Group, we represent people in legal actions representing their animals, essentially, and that involves animal control cases to prevent animals from being wrongly euthanized, prevent them from being labeled as vicious or potentially dangerous dogs. And we also represent individuals whose animals have been harmed by boarding facilities, grooming facilities, or have issues with their veterinarian, so veterinary malpractice matters. And while our work probably is 95% companion animal work, we do also want to work with other animals and take on agricultural issues as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Great. Yeah. Well, what I was hoping that we could kind of start is create this baseline or definition for everyone around animal law, right? What is it? Do animals actually have rights, or maybe some do and some don't, So I thought maybe we could kind of establish that first.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there?
Definitely. So animal law is a really broad term. And I think that unfortunately, when you say animal law or when you're looking up an animal lawyer, you find mostly dog bite lawyers. And I mean, unfortunately, plaintiff side dog bite lawyers, and occasionally dog bite defense lawyers. That's what usually comes up online. But animal law is a much broader concept, and it relates to all animal issues. And our firm, of course, isn't just focused on defending on animal bites, but also broader issues regarding animals. Animal rights refers to the right standing and welfare of animals. Specifically, also, it can refer in a non-legal sense to this belief that non-animal non-human animals, deserve to live their lives free from harm or for this purpose of alleged human benefit. So an animal rights attorney, we believe that animals do not just exist for humans. That's also probably a very similar idea to how vegans feel. I'm vegan as well as my partner, Jill, and that kind of goes with our moral beliefs as well. The alleged human benefit is seen through the consumption of animals as food, exploitation of animals through entertainment or circuses or show animals, as well as testing, using animals in testing for beauty products or other similar products.
Right. Okay. Great. 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 So now with Hogs and Kisses, our focus, right, is very much our dedication. While we absolutely love all animals and are vegan too, we provide care for farm animals or agricultural animals, livestock animals. So do livestock animals or agricultural animals have rights?
Sadly, there's almost no enshrined rights for agricultural animals. There's a few laws that are getting us closer, if you will, but we're nowhere near where we should be. The closest federal law, based on my understanding, would be the Animal Welfare Act, but it primarily applies to animals who are kept in zoos or labs. There's very, very little protection for agricultural animals, specifically those that most people eat. There is a law that states that vehicles transporting animals for slaughter must stop every 28 hours to allow animals exercise, food, and water. But this also only applies to certain animals. It doesn't apply to chickens and turkeys, which are actually the most farmed animals in the US, and they are exempt from rules like this. So very minimal protections for these animals.
Okay, got it. So what would it actually take to have that or these animals have animal rights, like actually have rights? And what does that mean for an entity like an animal or humans to have rights? What are we really talking about?
It's a really good question. So to have rights in a legal sense in court, you have to have personhood, which is basically status of some sort of entity, usually an actual person, a human, who has the legal rights and the ability to sue. Now, entities, for instance, have been granted this right, this personhood idea, like corporations. But that does not extend to animals. So, instance, an animal cannot go to court and sue. And, of course, understanding that animals can't speak to us in the way that we understand, right, in verbal communication. So it makes sense that they can't actually go into court themselves and sue, and that you can't actually represent an animal. For me, that's very frustrating because I would love to go to court and sue, on behalf of an animal versus on behalf of a human for an animal. So it's kind of got this almost three-prong back versus being able to directly help an animal. There are some laws I forgot to mention earlier, like that there are ag-gag laws, which are basically laws trying to prevent whistleblowing for the poor treatment of agricultural animals. Some states are starting to do away with those, and some of the case law is starting to kind of eat away at that ability. But unfortunately, that's a huge issue as well in talking about the rights of agricultural animals, because if we can't expose the issues that are happening to them, how can we fix them and how can we bring them to a court's attention? So that really impacts this ability to help them. And personhood is a really difficult topic when you're talking about an agricultural animal, because again, as we talked about, most Americans, most people in the world, unfortunately, do eat these animals, which means if you're giving them a status of personhood, right, these legal rights, and you're also saying that you can eat them, these concepts don't go together. That just doesn't mesh. So for animals to have rights, I think we have to have some sort of pseudo personhood or something in the middle, because we're not, unfortunately, going to get the entire US to go vegan as much as we would like that to happen. So we need to come up with something in the middle here to be able to sue on behalf of animals, to be able to get more laws on their behalf. And if we can come up with a middle ground that at least gives them some protections in the agricultural industry so that they're not being abused and they're not suffering as much. Because right now, of course, the ways that they can kill these animals is horrendous and they have barely any protection. So we need to come up with something in the middle, and that has to happen at the legislative level. We're not getting anywhere in Superior Court. Superior Court doesn't change laws. Maybe we'd get somewhere in appellate court, but even that can be very difficult because appellate court is generally interpreting the law versus creating law. So we really need to get at this at a legislative level.
Okay. Wow. So that's a lot. That's amazing. I find it, yeah, so fascinating, right? So, okay. So personhood, right? Yeah. So then if we are advocating for animals to have rights, then in our court system, what do you see being most effective? Like, should animal advocates start going for personhood for animals, or actually, like you were saying, maybe create this other type of right, and maybe we call it animalhood or personhood sub-level 1, like, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
But what is most effective to at least try to put some protections in place? And I guess what I'm asking is, like, this is incremental, right? This is not like a whole system overhaul.
Yeah.
But what do you see being, the next kind of step?
I think that going straight to getting personhood for animals is going to be unsuccessful because Americans, as we talked about, they're not there yet, right? Most Americans don't see animals as equal to humans. And that's what you need really to get to personhood. If we come up with some sort of kind of quasi personhood, I think that would be a good step. I don't think that we're going to be able to just jump right in. So as much as I would love to see nothing more than, or nothing less rather than animals being granted personhood and the same protections, there's going to have to be a middle ground so that they're not considered in the law's mind equal to humans, but that they are considered sentient beings deserving of protections and individuals deserving of rights. And right now we're not there at all. We're at property. So, if you look at a scale, right, we're at property for animals and personhood for humans and corporations. If we can at least start moving from property, because right now, sadly, most animals are viewed as almost the same thing as a lamp or a piece of furniture. And that's going to get us nowhere close to what we need.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So how does an animal advocate, because you were talking too about creating laws and such, so how does an animal advocate start lobbying for that kind of right? Like, where does that begin and how can people do that?
That's a great question. And I actually wanted to mention too that there are a lot of animal rights groups who are working on bills of rights for animals. So they're working on lobbying the different legislative entities to create bills of rights. And I think that we're probably closest on doing a bill of right for companion animals. And while that's not going to help, obviously, the agricultural animals, I think it will start to move the needle. And it's actually probably the most important first step is to getting a bill of rights for companion animals, because once people start seeing companion animals as more than property, then we can start pushing the bounds of that and moving towards the agricultural animals. So I think that's another kind of incremental change we have to make. And as for just, the average Joe or average Jill who wants to make a change, right? They can do a lot. They can vote for representatives who they know are focused on animal rights policies and issues. So using your vote to do this, reaching out to your local representatives, making sure that they know that their constituents feel really strongly about these issues, donating to organizations that focus on furthering these policies. So organizations like Animal Legal Defense Fund, they're doing a lot of work to change these policies. Mercy for Animals focuses on agricultural animals as well. Or Expand Animal Rights Now, we're working on these issues as well. PETA, all of those organizations who have a bigger impact because they're organizations, right? They're corporations, and they can impact legislative bodies more than just one person. If we all can start to support these organizations, that will help move the needle with the legislative organizations, the legislative groups, sorry. And then, of course, going vegan. utilizing certified vegan and cruelty-free products, that makes an impact, even though people think that, oh, my purchase isn't going to change anything. It does, because if you have not just one person making that change, but 1 million, 2 million people, one by one, we can start to make a difference.
Yeah, it really is amazing that I think in our culture today, I think the strongest vote is our dollar. Is exactly where you put your money shows, right, where you where what you're in support of and what you're not in support of. So yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so going down this path then, which by the way, I'm so happy to hear that there's a Bill of Rights. I didn't realize that happening for
There's a
animals. I think
few. They've
it's
been introduced a few
great.
different times. Yeah,
That's
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
fantastic.
you.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. That's so great because speaking of kind of like moving the needle in terms of law and policy making, more recently, think it's been now about a month, we had some animal agricultural law policy go all the way up to the Supreme Court. So certainly animal advocates had celebrated quite a big win on that one. I'd love to talk a little bit about it, and many of you might be familiar with it. It's called Prop 12 or Proposition 12. It's a piece of animal policy, animal agricultural policy that was created in California, so state law. And it was naming specifically sows, which are female pigs, breeding pigs, and then egg-laying hens, and then also two male calves, so veal, right, as people know it on their plate, and the conditions in which they are being raised or bred. And specifically for us, we were of course very interested in the hogs. So the sows. So just so that people understand, a crate in which a sow is placed in is about 16 square feet on average. And so this policy was advocating for more room. So they were calling it more humane conditions, right?
Mhm.
And just so everybody understands what more room means, we're talking 16 square feet. So basically that's sow for their entire life, because sows are basically in factory farms impregnated 3 times per year. Pregnancy period is about 115 days. So you multiply that times 3, we're almost at 365 days. So it's really their entire life, right? They can't get up or or lay or turn around, stand up, or anything like that. So they're laying down the full time. So they're advocating moving 16 square feet to 24 square feet, right? So just enough to be able to maybe turn around and or get up. So from the welfare or care of animals or the quality of life of the animals, it doesn't really change, right? So how can this Proposition 12, who went to the Supreme Court, that passed in favor of the law, be a win for animal advocacy? Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Prop 12 does focus primarily on those housing requirements and creates these minimum standards for the sizes of enclosures. And I agree with you, it's not necessarily a win for the animals, although it's better. I mean, certainly having those additional feet is an improvement and hopefully will prevent some of the really disturbing things that happen in terms of stepping on their babies and all of those atrocities, I guess is the best word for that. Maybe it will help with that. Maybe it won't totally fix it, but at least it's an improvement. I certainly think it's a small start. It's nowhere near enough. I, of course, agree with you. I would say, though, it is a win for animal advocates because it is showing that the Supreme Court is open to hearing animal law issues and not animal law only, but animal rights issues. And that's huge. I don't know if, frankly, any other major Supreme Court case related to this. So this is exciting for us, even though it's probably not considered a huge win for the actual animals who are experiencing it. It is really exciting in terms of showing that not only the Supreme Court is interested, but the public is interested, because the Supreme Court takes cases when they know that the public is invested. And the law passed by a large majority. I think it was 60%, maybe even more. So it's showing that, again, the public is interested in these issues. They're becoming more aware. Most people 10 years ago were completely oblivious to these things. They had no idea what was happening in factory farms. And I think day by day, we're starting to expose these issues more and more. And that's great for the animals in the long run. Again, as we talked about before with personhood and that scale, it's going to be incremental. And unfortunately, it's going to take the longest with agricultural animals versus companion animals.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, I think it's right. It's phenomenal. I think it was California. I had read somewhere like close to 63% said, yeah, I'd like my meat to be more humane, right? And as I started to read through it a bit more, I was realizing, oh gosh, there actually was already some legislation in Massachusetts. I think they called it Question 3, that also was addressing these extreme confinement situations that are occurring in factory farms. And I think something like over 70% of Massachusetts residents voted for it, you know. So it's absolutely interesting that if given the choice, people are saying, yes, they would like more humane treatment.
Mhm. I see your friend has joined.
This is Coco. She has to be in the middle of everything. And now she's about to take down. Yeah, she's using, hold on one second. She's using my little stage here as a scratching post. Okay, Coco. All right. All right. Come on. Okay, now she's
The
bringing
best
her brother.
interruption to an interview.
Yes, now she's bringing her brother Tito. Tito. Okay, no, Tito. Tito, you want to say hi here? Come say hi to Sarah. Okay.
Oh,
You want to say hi?
oh my goodness.
Tito
So
is
sweet.
the brother of Coco. We rescued them right before Christmas,
Aw.
and they are about 10 months old right now. And we rescued them at about 3 months old. They were 75 pounds, and they are now probably about almost 250.
Whew, wow.
Yeah,
They grow
yeah,
quick.
yeah. They you know, this is the age, right? And the weight that they get sent to slaughter. So we do try to use when we focus on educational efforts, try to just use their size a little bit to show people, you know, what exactly. I mean, they're babies, right? You know.
Yeah, they
So
are.
yeah. But these two are living an amazing life. So
They look very content.
yes.
I love it.
All right. Okay, good. So let me see. Let's get back to, oh yeah, so we're talking about prop health, right? So okay. So I was just saying how yeah, amazing that these states when put to the test to vote for it, overwhelming majority are saying yes, absolutely, we should be treating agricultural animals better.
Mhm.
For sure. So, you know, it's what then my mind goes to, right, is with us being so entrenched in animal welfare, we've been following this group called Direct Action. And, you know, they have been really pushing forth, again, a human right, which is called a right to rescue. And it's a right to rescue animals in these extreme exploitation situations. And not that long ago, I believe they were in I think it was a Smithfield pork facility. And they rescued 2 piglets because they were basically on the brink of dying. They were just kind of left.
Mhm.
And they took them from the facility. And so they were being sued, I guess, right, for stealing property.
Right.
But they then go to trial, whole big thing, right? And every single juror, like unanimously voted for that they were actually rescuing an animal, not stealing property. And I think that is huge when
Mhm.
people are like see the actual truth of what's going on. I think they're actually appalled by it all.
Yes, I agree. I think the biggest thing, and I have a couple of different points and maybe a little all over the place, but I think the biggest thing is exposing what's going on, because if we're able to show people, they will be horrified. And the problem is people right now can turn a blind eye. They don't have to see it. They can ignore it. They go to the grocery store, they pick up a package of pork, you know, and they just don't think that that's a pig, that's an animal. They don't have to see the process, and they don't see the terrible conditions. And so the trends for each state now, kind of California, Massachusetts, showing that people are interested and want more humane meat when they understand what that means and what they understand what's happening. It's amazing to me, because I think that we're seeing an increase in people's willingness to be open-minded and to actually want to know when you present this information. I remember 10 years ago when I first went vegan, and people didn't want to know. They didn't want to hear about it. And people now want to know, and they want to change it, and they want to make it better, even if they're not willing to fully go vegan. I think also we're going to start seeing a trend in the States to doing more of this, but I think, again, we were talking about it's where your dollars go. And so when a state has a really large agricultural industry, I think it might be harder because they have more say in the legislature of that state, right? They have big lobbying groups for them, where I think it's going to be a slow process for those states where they have these huge agricultural industries. And then kind of on this right to rescue thing that you're talking about, as we talked about earlier, the ag gag laws, that does prohibit a lot of people from seeing things, also from rescuing animals. And then, like you mentioned, people do get sued for what we call conversion in civil court. That would be kind of theft in civil court conversion. They can sue them for damages. And then on the flip side, in criminal court, they can be charged with theft. So we've got these two different court systems, criminal and civil, that can go after people for trying to save animals. So a right to rescue law or enshrined right in state constitutions, that would be incredible. But again, I think that's going to take time, especially in those big states where the agricultural economy or industry is kind of the main thing. So yeah, I'm hopeful. I think all of these developments are really exciting and really show a good trend for animals and for animal advocates. But I think it's going to be a slower process than you and I would probably want.
Right, of course, because at heart, when and maybe I'll just speak for myself, right? When I decided that, okay, at first I was going plant-based more kind of for health and boosting this and that of my health, right? And then started really seeing what was happening, factory farms, and then my shampoos or the chemicals that go into my cleaning products, and right, just everything. And I was like, okay, I'm adopting a full vegan lifestyle, right? And philosophy. Once you do that, you want the system completely to change to support that, because it's not just the welfare of the animals, but then how it impacts all the humans that are around these factory farms, their property, the property value, how it impacts the environment, where that excrement goes after the facilities, right? And is it going into our waterways? What about our oceans, right? I mean, like, it just cascades, right, into this large thing that our brains go immediately to, well, look, we should just change the system, but yeah, it is not that, like, we can't, it's so tough to just abolish the system that we currently have, So I go back and forth between what is most effective. Yeah. Is what's most effective these incremental changes, or do these incremental changes give people an excuse, right? Because if ultimately what we want is people not to eat animals, then is incremental giving them still some leeway to do it, right? And supporting the current system. It's like, yeah. I go back and forth. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I go back and forth too. Similarly, I feel the same way, but unfortunately, after, being in this world for a while now, I've realized that as much as I think the dramatic and immediate change would be the best, I don't think that it's going to be possible. I don't see it in a economy that has a huge agricultural industry. I don't see that happening. Unless we have some amazing, huge policy at the federal level that can basically subsidize all the people who are in animal agriculture. I would also say that there's this idea, you're probably familiar with it. Most vegans, I think, are sociological concept of carnism, which is basically a worldview or a life view. And sociology, as most people know, is the study of human behavior. And this is a concept of, this is how humans behave based on their culture. So men being around the grill, using meat, having those commercials with the men around the grill, you're a man if you eat meat. All of that stuff is so deeply ingrained in American culture that I don't think that we're going to be able to make that massive change, because of carnism runs through, unfortunately, every aspect of our existence.
Mhm.
I think I answered that question, but I agree
Sure.
with you. I'm on the border all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, right. We want to just, because I think part of it is like you see something, you see it's not working, let's go redesign something that does work, right? But to complete, like, to halt something that has been, like you said, historically ingrained in culture, right? All these things, it's now a part of foodie and food culture, right? And like how we enjoy holidays and family time is so
Yes,
much centered
holidays
around
for
food,
sure.
right? Yes. So
Mhm.
it is, we're not talking just about a building and a system. We're talking about, like you said, full on culture. And it is not just, right, United States, it's every, every country, every culture, every fabric of human life, right? So yeah, yeah, I know. I wish there was more, right, that we could do about that to move the needle. But I think so far we have been talking a bit about, let's maybe dig deeper on this incremental change, whether maybe right to rescue brings forth more need for this animalhood, is what I'll call it for now, since we don't have a name for the rights for animals at this moment. But yeah, right, something's gotta, I feel like, move it forward to really have us progress.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's one of the things I was thinking with the Bill of Rights for companion animals, although it's only, like I said before, for companion animals. If we could get that passed, I think that would be a great next step, because I think it'll start to change how people are viewing animals in general and start to move the needle there.
Yeah.
Um, One step at a time, I think, unfortunately, has to be the approach. Although I completely agree, it does feel sometimes like, well, we're giving them an excuse to continue doing XYZ because it's more humane. But I just don't see America in particular making that massive jump without someone at the federal level doing a huge policy and subsidizing all of these dairy farmers, all of these egg and cows, all of the farmers, for all of them. I don't think we're going to see that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And who knows, maybe some food technology may help, right? If profits are higher over here, will companies start to switch, right? Who knows
We've been seeing that.
what will tilt, right?
Yeah,
Really,
we have
really
been
tilt
seeing that.
things. Sure. Yeah.
That's
Well,
starting. I think that's starting.
absolutely. Yeah. Sarah, thank you so, so much for spending time with us and kind of just unpacking this and having this discussion around what it is that's needed and why it feels like change is so slow.
Yes.
And if you could point people to any kind of resource or place to start in terms of helping move the needle with policy, would you say locally they should start getting involved?
Yeah, I think locally is great. Like I mentioned before, reaching out to local representatives, making sure that they know that these issues are top of mind for their constituents, using your vote to vote for individuals who have good policy plans, if you will, for animals. And then, as I mentioned before, too, finding the organizations who do push these matters forward. And the big, names that come to mind, like I mentioned, are Mercy for Animals, Animal Legal Defense Fund, PETA, all of those bigger organizations. They have a bigger voice because they're more known. And then also helping rescues and helping places like your rescue to continue the work that they're doing, because not only do you guys rescue animals, but you also do education and advocacy, and that's huge, and we need to be supporting all of those local rescues and groups.
Yeah, great, 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 great. Yeah, absolutely. If any of you have specific law questions and want to reach out to Sarah, we'll make sure to put her contact information in our show notes so that you can, and maybe she can help you out. Again, Sarah, thank you so, so, so much for all the work that you do and the stand for animals that you are.
Thank you.
Yes, exactly. And then stick around. We're going to have a bit of a roundtable discussion and get some opinions about all of this information that we have shared here with you today.
thanks, Sarah, so much for that interview. We thought we might discuss a lot of these amazing topics with our local Charlottesville folks. Lexi here has been a long-time volunteer of Hogs and Kisses. Sarah has been a long-time friend of Hogs and Kisses. Lexi is actually headed off to law school so that she can pursue animal law, and Sarah is very interested in it, potentially also going down that track as well. And then we've got Pongo here, who is Lexi's non-human companion, right, Pongo? Thanks for joining us, bud. So we want to dive in, right? This episode is all about, should animals have rights? So let's start with that question. Should animals have rights? What do you think? Who wants to go first?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think it's almost funny that they don't have inherent rights just as we do.
Right, absolutely, yes, yeah, because it's really interesting, right? At one point, certain humans, females, certain ethnic groups, right, didn't have rights, right, you know, kind of thing, and now it's like, what do you mean they didn't have rights, you know? And I feel like the same with animals, right? It's just the fact that we're even talking about it is because we have created this world where they are used for what we want only, right? Food or entertainment or whatever means we want to make clothes, all that stuff. So yeah, ultimately for me in particular, I definitely believe that their life should be their own. Yeah,
I would totally agree. I mean, I think they're living beings, right? They're not things, so they deserve to be represented in that way and to have rights. I think it's kind of necessary. It's the only way we're going to be able to make any progress at all.
Right. But so this idea of rights is because also we have rules and we have this court of law, right? And we have all this stuff. So the idea of rights is that you have to be seen as a particular entity, right? So I know you've done some research in this area, Lexi. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I actually wrote a thesis. My undergraduate thesis was about the animal rights movement in the 19th century. So it was a history thesis. But people don't realize, you know, how early the movement really started. The SPCA was founded in 1866, so 1 year after the Civil War. And they were very radical for the time, and even radical by our standards today, especially in terms of like the species that they were fighting for and their rights discourse as well. I mean, their activism was always kind of connected to the law and animals having some sort of representation. The SPCA had agents that were basically equipped under the law to be able to arrest people who were in violation of existing animal welfare legislation.
Wow.
Which is pretty cool. So they were, stopping horse trolleys in the streets if they thought that horses were overworked, campaigning for, you know, better conditions, shipping cattle, stuff like that. All these kind of same battles we're still really fighting today. But yeah, and so it's really interesting to see. I mean, in their first year, they waged a lawsuit on behalf of turtles, which was like a huge shock to the nation because people didn't even really think of turtles as animals. They really they distinguished between animals and fish, and they said turtles are fish. They don't have consciousness. They can't, you know, why are we concerned about this at all? And that was a huge deal. I mean, because like we talk about now, like, and like you talked about in the interview, you know, we're so comfortable with the idea of like our companion animals maybe having rights, but not our livestock and these other animals that we don't look at in the same way. And from the beginning, they didn't discriminate on species membership, which was a huge thing, and that's really what I focused on, is kind of that expansive nature of their activism.
Wow.
Not early that started.
And I'm sorry, you said
1866.
1866.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow, that is incredible to think. Okay, so you were saying they covered so many different species. I see. Yeah. Yeah, because I think for now when people think about animal welfare, they think about it in companion animals, right? Then farm animal or agricultural, and then exotics, right? They kind of like put them into those groups. That is so interesting.
What was the turtle?
Yeah, so it was basically turtles were being shipped on their backs and like tied up. And that's, and it was for like turtle soup. Like they would ship them into the city. So these turtles were, I think, being shipped into Manhattan. And Henry Berg, who was the guy who founded the SPCA, when he saw this, he was just appalled by it, basically, the conditions of the turtles. And so I think that guy's name was Calhoun. They took him to court over it, and they actually lost the case, but it was huge in the kind of like what it provoked in terms of people talking about it in newspapers. I mean, if you go back, the research I did was kind of in the newspaper archives, and so many people wrote articles about it, and I think that was part of his intention as well, was to kind of do something shocking a little bit to get people talking about it, because people, you know, and then people were thinking about the question of, are turtles conscious? Do they deserve to have some sort of any kind of rights to be, you know, shipped like free from like intentional harm, essentially? So yeah.
Wow. I mean, it's interesting to me in that we do have this division when we look at humans as non-animals, but we're not, right? We're all beings. And if you were to say to someone, do you want to be shipped on your back? Before you're made into soup. It's a full different
Well, yeah, because as somebody, and I know you too, Sarah, because Sarah rescues elderly dogs. So as somebody who, you know, cares for animals as well in terms of like the rescue, so it would be so much easier if you could just ask them, like, what do you want? You know what I mean? Because we are ultimately always trying to interpret and see if we can meet their need, you know, but there is that, you know, that's a barrier, you know, because I wish I could know, do you like living here, pigs? You know, like, I wish I would know that. If not, what would you like? Hey, turtle, do you want to be shipped? No, you know, I mean, it would just make things so much easier if we could actually understand one another, you know?
For sure. But you know, it's like when you make eye contact with the pig, or, you know, the videos online that are so astounding is when cattle trucks or pig trucks are stopped at a stoplight, and there's activists outside, and they're making eye contact, and oftentimes these animals are crying. There's very vivid expressions of fear, because they are conscious, like they do fully, not maybe fully understand, but they understand something bad is happening. They're uncomfortable. And that to me, it's like when we talk about these turtles, it's like out of sight, out of mind for a lot of people. And I think the activism movement has done a lot of good work to bring these things to the forefront and have people be able to see them. But again, most of the time it's vegans that are seeing them, or it's people that already have their minds made up to see them. And that's, you know, a big thing is when you ask your people, where did your food come from? They're not fully following that being's life through its cycle. And a lot you've talked about with, you know, Prop 12.
Prop 12, absolutely.
And people are now thinking about gestation rate and you know, 3 pregnancies a year. And, and it's just a lot to take in. And I brought that up in a discussion earlier. And, and, you know, people don't have the time to think about that, or don't love thinking about. Especially, and I have found I am a radical vegan myself. Hopefully it's not shocking, but it's hard not to say things to people like, would you want to be impregnated 3 times a year and kept you never see the sunlight, you can't stand up, you can't turn around, you can't have a relationship with your children, you know, and people aren't willing to see it in that light. But what's the difference? What is that difference?
It's interesting you said, because that's actually another thing they were doing back in the 19th century, is talking about like our commonalities, right? They had a, it was called actually Our Dumb Animals was the name of this, the SPCA's magazine. And they meant dumb more like mute, right? Like can't speak, which is another thing we're talking about. But yeah, and they would, I remember like there was one image they had of like, you know, boys would steal like eggs from the nests of birds, and it was like birds carrying the boys away, and it was it said, like, how would you like it, basically. And so talking about, you know, trying to get people to like make connections to animals, because that is such a huge thing, and that's part of the reason I also wish we could like speak to them. Is because it's those barriers that people put up. When really we're all beings that want to like live a peaceful life.
I even catch myself using the word radical to describe what we do. Why are we the radical? Because we care about other beings, and it's
it's because, you know, again, kind of as we were talking about through the interview, and you were bringing up Prop 12, and then Massachusetts has question 3 and stuff. I think in general, when people, you talk to somebody and you'll hear people go, yeah, I'm an animal lover, or like the people who voted on these, on these things, these policies. They're like, of course I want my meat to be more humane. They're automatically, but it's kind of pointing, like you were saying, they just don't even know the full process, right? Because all of it the industry tries to hide it, right? So that we are disconnected from our food and will buy more and not think about the full thing. But I'm always telling people, you are kidding yourself if you think this is what our ancestors did. Yeah. Right? There were no factories right before the 50s and that movement of making everything a factory, It was literally, animals actually were on the land and actually, but the animals that are so-called being fought for in this Prop 12 and Question 3, they never touch foot on land ever. I mean, except for when maybe they're leaving the factory to go onto a truck, maybe. But even then, it's still probably steel to steel, right? And so for some, but I guess then some people throw their hands up and kind of go, well, what alternative do we have, right? And that's where, of course, a bunch of vegans and plant-based folks come in and kind of say, listen, don't eat it. It's your alternative, right? But I know there are myriad of reasons, for that. But
even that too in itself, it's like we will make a difference based on consumerism and demand if we stop wanting these things. Yeah. But even that's a slow trickle.
Yes,
correct.
Correct.
We already have these systems in place that are set up to provide a certain amount of pork and milk and beef and all of that based on what people are eating and how our population is growing.
Yes.
And that brings back the question you ask, is this a slow trickle of change?
Right.
Or is there going to be a defining moment where we just make a huge shift as humans and as a society to correct the wrongs that we've and systems we've built that are just feeding these atrocities every day.
Yeah, this idea of change and what exactly constitutes change, right? Because ultimately, maybe it comes to how fast we want things done as to whether we can call change. Because, for instance, I had set a goal for myself about exercising more this year, right? Well, you can't just go from, day 1 to day 10 and hope that you're in a particular condition by day 10. It doesn't work that way, right? There's slow bits of change, incremental. You have to be disciplined and keep it going, So change in that context, small incremental change works very well and your body acclimates or maybe your habits change, But in this case, where we see something that has occurred over, factory farming, like I said, let's just even think about that, right? So that started, in the 50s, 60s, right, where it's mass. And we're now 2023, right? So that's, 70-ish years, right, of growing food that way or handling food that way. So how do you go about change? Because it's not just, in other words, the process of changing how the animals are raised and killed and all that kind of thing, or doing away with factories, we could probably put a system in place to change all that. But it's the mindset, it's the money making, it's the other systems, right, that it's like, oh my God. So then my mind goes to, because there's a whole group of vegans out there who are much more like abolitionists, right? And I think at heart, maybe we all are, right? We just want to do away with it all, So how in the heck do you constitute change? That's the part I keep grappling with. I am in a cycle, a vicious cycle about it.
Well, when you're up against government subsidies that have
exactly. Yes. So how, and so in that case, you do hope that people who are a little bit more, business savvy or, folks who are trying to be a little bit more, thinking ingenuity, right, comes along and makes then something a bit more attractive, right? So there is a lot of biotech right now, right, looking into different food alternatives. And so then does that become the catalyst for real change, right, I don't know, and then can we be responsible in doing biotech in that way, and then being where we aren't hurting sentient beings, right, but yet nourishing and feeding people and having people uphold their cultural, practices around food. Right? It's just...
Well, when you talk about, change, it's like we have to make concessions and meet people where they are.
Yeah.
So when we're coming at conversations at the Juice Laundry, right, we try not to push the word vegan too much.
Yeah.
It's like, here's a meal alternative that's going to leave you feeling better with good energy, etc. And so it's sort of the same in making these changes. So where are we meeting people? Well, right now, we're in this massive heat wave. So people who are feeling that heat wave are maybe more likely to engage in a conversation about, well, what's causing this? What can humans affect change to slow climate change if we're not past that point. But it's like, what's the number one cause of greenhouse gas? Our food system. So that's like an easy way to start a conversation, I think, with people. For instance, we were talking a little bit offset. I had a conversation with someone this week who wanted to know what was wrong with eating fish. Because fish can't feel, they're not sentient.
Right.
We've disproved all of these things by now, but when people talk about fish, I said, well, when you imagine how does that fish get to your plate? He said, someone's standing with a fishing pole, they catch the fish.
Right.
Okay, that's not how these systems work anymore. We know there are these massive fishing nets that are killing off sharks and whales and totally destroying the ecosystem in the ocean, which is warm anyways. Fish are mutated and full of mercury and microplastics. I think change happens, sadly, at a small level where we are right now. And it's those little conversations. It's him realizing, that didn't get here to me as I thought it would, and it's full of mercury and plastic.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe his choice is then, okay, I'm gonna eat less fish. And I mean, yay. Okay, but let's talk about the milk. Let's talk about the cheese. Let's talk about that hamburger you're eating. Maybe the bacon, the pork.
I know. It's the whole thing about meatless Mondays.
Yeah.
Right? Yes, I'm a proponent for meatless Monday, right? But it is a drop in the bucket, right? Yeah. Again, in this conversation of change, right? And even with the with the fish, right? Because it's so interesting, because that's what I was saying, the vision that people have in their heads, right? They still think it's old MacDonald, E-I-E-I-O, and that everybody's frolicking together on the grass, and it's like, what? I mean, because it's so much so that, with the fish industry, so if you ever check cans, a food, everything always says product of Thailand, if you look at that, and it's because a lot of these industries are now, controlled by mafia groups and all this kind of stuff. So now they have people in these tanks where they're growing these fish, because there are other larger fish coming to try and eat the current fish you're growing as your product. So they actually are killing the predator fish along with harvesting, so there are these people in tanks killing, I think it's porpoises, I think it's dolphins that come to eat these other kind of, so it's what? I mean, just our involvement in food has literally completely, in my word, bastardized, right?
Yeah.
What food of old was,
Right.
So anyway, it's now, how do we think? Because again, this idea was, should animals have rights? Of course, we all believe they should, right? And then on top of that, how do we have policy support us? Because we were talking about animal law and going into animal law, and I have many a times asked Lexi, "Are you sure you want to go into animal law?"
Yeah.
So what can we do there in terms of change? Because definitely we've been talking about conversations with folks, helping to educate. There are documentaries, right? But what about policy, and what more can we do? Because definitely, as we've been talking about Prop 12 and Question 3, those policies are talking about giving an animal a tiny bit more space. We're not really talking about changing their lives, right? Or even having it be a lesser amount, right, of animals. So I don't know. What do you all think about how can policy really create change?
Right. Well, it's like as it exists now, right? Like we talked about before, animals are still property under the law, which is the biggest problem. Right. And I always come back to, you know, when I'm having conversations about animal law, I'm like, what I would love to see the most is for animal, and you talked about this in the interview, is for animals to have something closer to personhood. That's really what they need to be, you know, to have the sort of rights that we're talking about. Because right now, all we can really do is like anti-cruelty legislation, which is essentially what like Prop 12 is, right? Like trying to lessen the cruelty, which really is so far from where we want to be.
Yes.
But I do think it's encouraging that, you know, you talked about like the Smithfield case with the right to rescue and Prop 12 going on the way to the Supreme Court. I think, you know, it is encouraging to me in that regard that people, that animals are starting to be more. Oh, sorry. Yeah, he's alerting me to that. But you know that these cases are being heard, and it goes back to also the public opinion thing, because now people are more aware of like if these cases are more publicized, then people realize like, wait a second, it's not this image that's been promoted to me like on my milk carton of like the cows, you know, being out in the field and the farmer going out to milk them, and you know, so I mean, in terms of policy, like I think that we do kind of need a dismantling of the system as is, and animals need to have something more like personhood. But I think that you know, these small like incremental policies, as frustrating as they are, I think that it does more than maybe we realize in terms of people's perception and opinion.
Yeah. Right. I mean, totally on that track, but some of our dogs that we rescue are from South Korea, where up until I think 2 weeks ago it was legal to farm and kill and eat dogs. But they're now passing legislation to ban not only eating dogs but the dog meat trade, which will take a long time, right? As we see in a lot of countries, stuff goes on behind closed doors, and you know, when people are used to doing certain things. But there have been some really cool stories they highlight where these people who are sort of born into dog farms that they inherit or whatever, and they've spent their whole lives growing dogs, slaughtering them and selling them for meat, have now transformed into growing plants. And some of these farmers, you know, they're just these genuine farmers. They're not in touch with the broader world a lot of times, and they go in and interview them about how has your quality of life changed. And it is amazing. You know, they go from these like sad, depressed to just lighting up with life and loving their new lifestyle. And I think that that speaks to a lot of systems we have here in America, and the food system, where a lot of it is hidden where we don't see. Or communities of lower socioeconomic status, a lot of brown and black communities in particular, especially when we look at North Carolina, and how pig farms, the fumes, the off-gassing, you know, the chemicals, the literal waste from the pigs is giving children respiratory issues, cancer, and like, we're not looking at those things. But also for communities that have huge Smithfield factories, those are the jobs available. And people there aren't making enough oftentimes to move, or don't want to leave their families who have been there. So we see this like cyclical system, just like, you know, giving people these jobs that also are really bad for their mental health.
Absolutely.
And so there are all of these questions that tie into, yes, we're tackling animal rights and personhood, but it's also still linked to human rights.
Absolutely. But yet I would love for certain human rights groups to actually stand up and start talking about the food system. And if we're talking about policies and we're talking about creating rights for things, I mean, if you think about what is considered food in the inner cities, you will see multiple, fast food places and stuff in inner cities. But you won't actually see gardens, or you won't actually see, farmers markets or whatever, you know, like or very rarely, you know, I think the term is called food deserts, I think, and such, right? So, you know, it's like, gosh, why even won't those groups stand up and really take on food and ag? It's like, it's a really, something is there where they're not, you know.
Well, yeah, you saw the NAACP right after COVID when you know, children that weren't in school weren't getting provided meals.
Right.
So there was a lot of volunteer work and organizations that went in and made sure people had access to food that would normally get it from school. Well, the NAACP stepped in and said their studies show that I think it's like 80 to 90% of African American children have allergies to dairy, which sort of applies to all humans.
So ultimately, we would love to hear from you. Do you think animals should have rights? And also, what are your thoughts about ways that we can have policy support change, like really big change, and systemic change, right, for our food systems, animals, their way of life, and whether or not we can actually grant them personhood, right, in our system? We'd love to hear from you. We thank you so much for watching and beating around the barn with us.